So this portion we're calling Rise Up, using creativity to make change. So I think we're going to dive into the making of protest music, effective strategies for driving change in our industries. And so I wanted to start, Lorraine, would you mind just saying a couple of words about yourself and just introduce yourself to our lovely guests?
You mean like a bio?
Give us a little bio.
These days I like to say, I'm an artist and an activist. Please don't hold it against me. For the past 40 years, I've just been working in whatever variety of medium I can find to make music, to make films, to make art, and to try to tie them to community in some way, to have another layer of impact.
And ShoShona, would you like to do the same, please?
Anin bojo jashkobanaze kwe desnakazan migazi dodem Bachawana and Donjaba. I'm from a beautiful place on the shores of Lake Superior called Bachawana, and I'm Ojibwe and Anishinaabe. And I'm an artist. I have a band called Digging Roots with my husband and partner in crime in all things. And I've also been working on, expanding and creating platforms. And this year we hosted the very first ever International Indigenous Music Summit, where we brought together people from around the world to talk about how music can affect change and how we can amplify voices that need to be heard. And yeah, that's kind of my jam. That's the stuff I love.
I'd also love to congratulate you that WOMEX presented you with an advocacy award for your work in Indigenous affairs, and congratulations.
Yeah.
So Dave touched on this, and I think it's really important to take stock. Where are we? But before we get to where are we, I think we need to look back because, again, it's so secular, these things. And Lorraine, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where we were, where you were when Rise Up was the urgent call. What was happening in Toronto?
Oh, and that's interesting because I think so much about the success of Rise Up. It feels so much to me about timing and luck and some talent in there, but really timing, because if you think about Toronto back in the late 70s, early 80s, coming out of the punk movement and all of that, the political situation in Toronto was it was a small C conservative town with a large influx of Caribbean and other immigrants coming in. You had the second wave of feminism. You had the new presidency of Ronald Reagan. You had censorship in Ontario at the Film Censorship Board. And then you had the bathhouse raids. And so the attack on queer culture, young, gay, lesbian, queer culture. So you had all of these things together coming in streams, a confluence of energy. And our band, which was so influenced by the Caribbean and African music coming into the country, made music as a result of that. And the song came out of that. This confluence, these streams of these rivers of change.
ShoShona, do you feel as though we're sort of in a mirror time of this? Does this seem relevant to today?
Well, yeah, like Dave was talking about this extreme polarization of our culture where, this great divide seems to be opening. And I don't know if it was always there, and now it's becoming more apparent. Or if somehow we have emerged into a new space that hasn't happened for a long time. I just know that, from my perspective, it's time for those songs to be sung, and it's actually a time for courage. It takes great courage to step out of line, and for the artists who, are on major labels and have, feel like they have things to lose, that's a certain kind of courage. But then there's a different kind of courage, like the example that you shared, where artists actually lay their lives down for their beliefs. And we've become unaccustomed to that kind of courage here. And I actually think that I've seen that in my community, in the Indigenous community. I think we have to understand what we have to lose before we're willing to step out like that and show that kind of courage. And I'm hoping that we're starting to understand what we have to lose right now. but also what we have to gain, because it's a moment of great potential. And I know that songs are at the center of that.
What was the impetus for you to start speaking up and becoming an activist in this space, ShoShona?
Probably my mom, if I'm honest. She's an artist and an activist and an educator. But I also think just simply being an Indigenous person, silence is our enemy. And I don't know that any of us really have had a choice to engage in the struggle in some way, loud or quietly. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure that it was like a choice for me.
Just a natural, compelling mission.
Well, yeah, I think, just in the same way, like it's not a choice for me to be political. I am inherently political as a brown woman. And as an Indigenous person, I think inherently compelled to speak. I'm not trying to say that everybody should do a thing, or that everyone should be speaking, or, we all have our own ways. Like, I'm an artist, so that was the way that I came to it.
Lorraine, how about you?
I felt like I didn't have a choice either, really, because I think I came to an identity of politics long before I came to the identity of being a musician. Music was a way to express alienation and depression and fears, and as an immigrant's daughter who went through a lot of hard times when I was growing up, I think I just came naturally to want to help the underdog, because I saw so much how people were being treated, and I thought I can be the bullier, or I could be on the other flip side of it. So I didn't feel like I had a choice. But I did want to say one other thing about Rise Up, which was very interesting. Not only was it a surprise for us, like the extent of its lengthy term, enduring, performance, but at first we were not popular at all. Like, as a band, we were not accepted, really, to be honest, by the mainstream music industry. We were accepted by the people. We began as a grassroots band who happened to, by luck, make it into the mainstream. And once we were there, we had a different kind of voice. And then the mainstream music industry began to accept us a little bit more. But really, really, it came from what you said, the grassroots. Those were the people that found what we were saying important to them, and they grew us. So we came about it in a different way than most people get success.
Sounds as if there's so much that you have in common, all of you, about community and attaching your music to a community, and that helps sort of all the boats rise when the tide comes in. Dave, I was so curious. I heard in an interview you were talking about the Dixie Chicks and what happened when in Shepherd's Bush, when Natalie Maines made that comment, and it was sort of heard around the world and really affected their career. And that actually caused different artists to rethink their platforms. And I wonder if you could sort of speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, for those who don't know the incident that Miranda's referring to, the Dixie Chicks were playing at the Shepherd's Bush Empire in London a matter of days before the Iraq War began in 2003. And the vast majority of people in London were opposed to that war. There were 2 million people marching on the streets in opposition to the government's policy at that time. And so, in a sense, the Dixie Chicks were on very safe ground, saying that they were ashamed of their President Bush and agreed with the protesters that the Iraq War should not happen. The crowd cheered at Shepherd's Bush. This was not controversial, but of course, as soon as it was reported in places like their home state of Texas, all hell broke loose, and they paid a huge economic, at least, price for doing that. Now, it's true that then other artists started to become cautious and started to self-censor. The most interesting example, perhaps, is Madonna, whose song American Life had this incredible video, which was a very bold anti-war statement. It actually finished with Madonna throwing a hand grenade at a lookalike George Bush. You can still find it online. But of course, the moment this broke out with the Dixie Chicks, that video was scrapped, and she filmed a new one. It was just her singing to camera in front of various national flags. I mean, completely sanitized of all politics. So it's a problem. I mean, I would urge artists to be bold and not to self-censor. Jerry Dammers, who had a huge impact on me, he was one of the most important members of the band, The Specials, from the Two-Tone label. He wrote Free Nelson Mandela, which became a very important anti-apartheid anthem in the 1980s in Britain, and indeed in South Africa, by the way. He said to me once, you know, it's a complete mistake to self-censor, because his experience is that he's not only done well enough, commercially speaking, but he's also met the right people. You know, if you're honest about what you think through your art, you will meet your comrades, and they will remain lifelong friends. So, you know, you might as well get on with it.
I think that's what Rise Up really did, because not only did it become an anthem, but it also was sort of a banner that was then waved, where people could meet and group together. But I think there's also, so there's self-censorship, I think, that we artists feel uncomfortable speaking up, but there are other forces that prevent artists from coming forward and speaking their truth. And I wonder if you have had experiences of this, not just self-censorship, but gatekeepers or any kind of feelings of unease stopping you.
Yes, a lot of unease. I certainly myself felt really uncomfortable having a political voice when I was young, in a way, because people were often asking me, why do you have to have an opinion about everything? Why do you have to associate with an issue? You know, why do you have to? You could be more successful if you only, you know, there was a lot of that that came through. But I've also deeply connected to this idea that you know, you can't push the river, you can make another tributary. You know, if you're lucky, there will be many that come along after you. You can cut a path for something. And so I took solace in that, and solace in my colleagues who were doing the same thing, like you, and, you know. So sure, we all face the barrier. But then what do you do with it? You got to crack a hole in the wall, get to the other side.
Yeah. How about you, ShoShona?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm looking at it sort of historically, also from the context that from my community's music and art was suppressed. Our language was suppressed. It was illegal. People went to jail for singing their songs. And that was, you know, that law didn't change that long ago. It was 1951, I think, when the potlatch ban law finally was overturned. And so that means that, like, my mother and my father were already well into their lives underneath that ban. And so, like, Raven and my generation is the first generation that was born outside of that. So I think that we came to creating, both consciously and unconsciously, with this sense of urgency, and this sense also of fear, you know. And I think because that, you know, those things get passed down and are still really present in our communities now. So, you know, and I think when we first started, we recorded 3 records before we actually made like a romantic love song. We were writing love songs for the people and for the land. Like, this is where we were at, and we still are. Although we love each other, so we sing about that sometimes too. But, you know, I think that I think early on there was a lot of I don't want to call it pressure. There was just a lot of encouragement for us to sing about other things, you know. And we had this great agent. I really liked him very much, but he, you know, his idea was that we needed to, like, change it up. We could be a really successful band if we would stop singing about these things, you know. So I don't know. We're still here, and we're still singing about those things. So you know, there certainly seems to have been some shift in the tide. And I think that that's a good place to be, but I don't think that we should take it for granted or be complacent. because it can change like that. We have to use these moments.
I loved, Lorraine, I loved your analogy of this river and then these tributaries and sort of going off on your own path that you find and creating almost a tipping point where you're meeting other people start to do the same thing as you, and even though it's a small movement, it starts to create a whole other path. And Dave, you referenced sort of that mainstream music to distract, I think, which carries on, and I think the way that streaming platforms are sort of rewarding non-niche artists, or just sort of rewarding the things that are streamed more because they're streamed more, which makes them streamed more. So I think maybe you're all sort of saying to be very conscious of taking a look at the niche, because that's where the interesting things are happening, and that's where those noises are being made. So do you have any ideas of where to sort of pay attention to those niche voices? Where do we find them in our various communities?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, I think there's two parts to that for me, two parts to the question. I mean, certainly there is very interesting music taking place all the time, including overtly political music, all over the world. But often you have to dig a bit to find it. But I think that the best way for that music to have some sort of life, to find an audience, and indeed to become politically effective, is, I mean, as I mentioned towards the end of the talk, is when we consciously link up with political organisations and the organised working class movements like the trade unions, which is what Rock Against Racism did so effectively in 1976 in Britain, at a time when that was incredibly important. You know, I think it's easy to forget or not to know just how racist Britain was at that time. And they very effectively steered a whole generation towards anti-racism. And therefore, I think it's interesting to be quite specific about the ingredients you need to be effective. You know, I don't think it's enough just to sort of be yourself as an artist, although I think that is important. I think you also need to look at, you know, which sort of, you have to also look at the people that you need to persuade to get on board, and vice versa. You need to look at the people who you need to get on board behind and to support. So yeah, two things. You know, definitely there's interesting music at the margins, but to bring it in more to the centre and for it to then have some political power, I think we need to talk very specifically about the ingredients required.
I think one thing that ShoShona, we were speaking earlier, and it's about creating space to have those conversations and not always rely on the people in the margins to make those spaces. We in the music industry need to make it a priority to find spaces for people to speak and be heard. Now, and I feel like this is something that is very dear to your heart as well.
Well, and yeah, I think, you know, I speak about my identity as an Indigenous person and Indigenous rights and this connection to land, not because this is the only thing I care about or because that's the only way that I engage in the world, but I really believe strongly that we have to start in our own backyards. Like, this is the beginning point. It's not where we stay. It's just where we begin. And I think that, you know, the goal, like, the reason that I actually want to create platforms and amplify Indigenous voices is because we all need those voices at the table. We all benefit from hearing those voices. So it's not an act of goodwill, and it's not a counterbalancing exercise. It's an exercise in bringing the voices to the table that we all need, so that we can do the work we have ahead of us, you know. And I think that diversity of voices makes us all stronger and better and more full of potential as communities and societies. So, you know, this what Miranda's talking about, and we were talking about it for a while, but it's just like, let's be brave and open things up and make sure that those voices are being heard. Let's do it for us. I mean, yes, let's be good, you know, like, let's be good to one another and create space for one another on one another's behalf. But it's not an altruistic exercise, you know. It's like, let's do it because we need it, and if we don't do it, we're not going to get through this, I don't think. We have we have to figure out a way to be together, and we have to be strategic.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me too when you started off by describing Toronto in the late 70s and 80s is actually we're there now again.
Yeah, I feel that too. I feel it's a come around moment, and just to add to what you were saying, I feel so much that, and what Dave was saying, that there's so many different aspects of music that are useful in our lives. And there's the music for healing, and the music for transformation, and the music for anger, joy, anger, poetry, rebellion. All of these things are tools for change. And they're like personal change and societal change. And we should not be veering away from that. You know, we listen to the music we love not just because we have memories attached to it, but because they really augment our core values. And right now, today, more than ever, we are being asked the question, what is your value? What are your core values? Where do you want to go with your life? And what sort of augments that? And if we're lucky, it's some of the music we make. You know, that's where we find our other origins, you know?
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end this segment. Thank you so much to my guests, Dave Randall, ShoShona Kish, and Lorraine Segato.